Picture this. It's a Saturday afternoon, sometime in 1983. You're 7 years old and you've got 10p burning a hole in your pocket. The newsagent on the corner smells of newsprint and sugar and something warm you can't quite name. You press your nose against the glass counter and the whole universe shrinks down to one glorious question. What are you going to choose? There was a time in Britain when sweets weren't just a treat. They were a whole event, a ritual, a language. You didn't just eat a sweet, you negotiated for it, saved up for it, traded it in the playground like currency. Every corner shop was a treasure chest, and every child was a tiny adventurer with a paper bag and a dream. This is the story of the sweets that built us, the ones you might have forgotten, the ones that, the moment you hear the name, send you straight back to that counter, that bag, that first magnificent rush of sugar on your tongue. Let's start with the ones that cost almost nothing and meant everything. Mojos, 4 for a penny, chewy, slightly waxy, coming in flavours that barely resembled real fruit, but somehow tasted better than real fruit ever could. Cola, strawberry, banana. You'd fold one in half and push the whole thing in your mouth and your jaw would ache for 10 minutes and you wouldn't care even slightly. Then there were Black Jacks and their sisters, the fruit salads. Also 4 for a penny, right through the 1970s and into the 1980s. Black Jacks tasted of aniseed in a way that divided the playground into two camps, the ones who loved them and the ones who were wrong. They turned your tongue black. That was part of the deal. That was the joy. By 1975, a bag of penny sweets from your local Woolworths pick and mix could set you back an entire 20p and feel like the greatest extravagance imaginable. But let's talk about the really special ones. The ones with a bit of theatre. Refreshers. That sharp sherbet centre wrapped in a hard outer shell, like a tiny edible surprise. You'd bite through the outside and hit the fizz, and for a half second, your whole face would clench. Every single time. You knew it was coming. You did it anyway. Space dust. Or as some called it, pop rocks. This arrived in Britain in the late 1970s and caused something close to hysteria among the under-12s. A powder that crackled and sparked on your tongue. Parents were suspicious. Children were obsessed. The rumour, entirely false, completely irresistible, was that if you swallowed it with a fizzy drink, something catastrophic would happen. Nothing catastrophic ever happened, but every kid held their breath anyway. Spangles came in a tin, a proper tin, like they deserved to be treated with some dignity. Old English flavours, butterscotch, acid drop, barley sugar, they tasted of something older than pop music, older than television. They tasted of your nan's handbag, of long car journeys, of waiting. There was a whole category of sweets that were specifically designed to be slightly alarming. Toxic waste. Arriving later, in the 1990s, these small drums of sour candy were a dare as much as a sweet. The marketing was the product. You weren't buying candy, you were buying proof of courage. Half the school playground watched while you attempted to keep one in your mouth for 60 seconds without pulling a face. Nobody managed it. Everybody claimed they did. Jawbreakers were a commitment. You'd buy one the size of a small marble for 2p, and that sweet would last you 3 days. 3 days of a sphere slowly changing colour as the layers dissolved, pink to white to yellow to some colour you couldn't name. It was patience training for the under-10s. Gobstoppers were the same principle, but even more so. You didn't eat a gobstopper quickly. You couldn't. It was architecturally impossible. You took it out to check the colour. You put it back in. You took it out again. You compared it with your mates. The whole experience lasted longer than most Saturday afternoon films. Now, we need to talk about the chocolate. Not your upmarket stuff. Not your milk tray or your after eight. The chocolate that lived at the bottom of the pick and mix. The penny sweets that happen to involve cocoa. Chocolate limes. Hard-boiled on the outside. Dark chocolate at the centre. Lime flavour somewhere in the middle. This combination should not have worked. It absolutely worked. Caramac. A pale gold bar made from caramel and milk. No cocoa content whatsoever, and therefore, technically, not chocolate at all. This mattered nothing. Caramac was beloved in a way that defied category. It tasted like the inside of a quality street tin, but somehow more so. By 1985, Rowntree's was producing enough Caramac to fill approximately 12 million bars per year. 12 million. And yet somehow it always felt like a secret. But the real heart of British sweet culture wasn't in the chocolate. It was in the chewy, the sticky, the kind of sweet that required genuine physical effort. Cola bottles, fizzy or plain, it didn't matter. A paper bag of cola bottles was a social event. You shared them. You counted them out carefully and made sure nobody got more than their fair share. If someone gave you their last cola bottle, that was affection. That was trust. Jelly babies were older. They'd been around since 1864, in one form or another, but in the 1970s they were everywhere. A tin of Bassett's Jelly Babies appeared at Christmas in the same way the Quality Street tin appeared. An annual certainty. A sweet you associated with warmth and adults who were in a good mood. Tom Thumb Drops. Pineapple cubes. Rhubarb and custard. These were the sweets of corner shops and market stalls and seaside arcades. They smelled of sugar and something floral. They came in jars with lids that stuck. The shopkeeper scooped them with a metal spoon, and they rattled into the paper bag like small, beautiful hailstones. Some sweets were tied to specific moments. Sherbet fountains, a licorice straw pushed into a tube of loose sherbet, were a lunchtime thing, a break time thing. You'd lick the end of the licorice and dip it in, and the whole tube was gone in 15 minutes, and your fingers were white with powder. The sherbet dip dab worked similarly. A lolly for dipping, a bag of sherbet for the dipping. Simple technology, profound results. And then there were the sweets that came with something else. Bazooka Joe bubblegum, with its tiny comic strip inside the wrapper. The gum itself was hard as chalk until you chewed it for a while, but that wasn't the point. The point was the comic. You collected them. You swapped them. You hoarded them in a drawer somewhere and found them years later and felt something complicated and warm. Here is the number that still gets people. In 1971, decimalisation changed the price of almost everything in Britain. Before February 15th of that year, the old penny system meant sweets were priced in farthings and halfpennies in ways that gave children maximum purchasing power. After decimalisation, a new penny was worth nearly 2.5 old pennies. The sweet shop recalculated, the pick and mix adjusted, and for a few months, children across Britain felt, instinctively if not mathematically, that something had been taken from them. Margaret Harrison, a retired teacher from Wolverhampton, remembers standing in her local newsagent in March 1971, aged 9, trying to work out why her 2p didn't go as far as it used to. It just felt wrong, she says, like the world had shifted slightly. The world had shifted slightly, but the sweets remained. Mostly. Some of them didn't make it. Texan bars, the ones with the cowboy on the wrapper, the hard toffee centre, the slogan about being too good to rush, disappeared from shelves in 1984. There was mourning. There were letters written to Rowntree's. There were children who simply could not believe that a thing they loved could be removed from the world on the basis of sales figures. Spangles went the same way, phased out by the early 1980s, reissued briefly in 1995 to enormous nostalgic excitement, then gone again. Opal Fruits became Starburst in 1998. The flavours didn't change. The name changed. It felt like a small bereavement. But some came back, and some never left. Haribo arrived in British shops in 1981 and never went away. Parma violets, floral, powdery, divisive, are still made today, still tasting of lavender soap in a way that is somehow deeply comforting once you've accepted what they are. The corner shop of your childhood is mostly gone now. Woolworths closed for good in January 2009. 807 stores shuttered in a matter of weeks, and the pick and mix counter went with them. The physical act of choosing your own sweets, of pointing and asking for another one of those, of watching them weighed and bagged and handed over, that ritual is mostly memory now. But here is what is true. Those sweets weren't just sugar and gelatine and artificial flavouring. They were the first things you chose for yourself, the first small expenditures of your own tiny economy, the first trades, the first gifts, the first deliberate pleasures. We had less pocket money, but somehow every penny felt like a fortune. If you grew up in Britain and you remember pressing your nose against that glass counter, you know exactly what I mean. If this brought back memories, share it with someone who remembers the smell of a paper sweet bag on a Saturday afternoon. Please subscribe to keep these stories alive.